Hi, this is Greg Thomas, and welcome to the Welsh-American channel. We have presented many different videos on early American revolutionaries of Welsh heritage who made the founding of the United States possible. Some of these include flagmaker Betsy Ross, Martha Washington, wife of General George Washington, signers of the Declaration of Independence, including Lewis Morris, William Floyd, Francis Lewis, Button Gwinnett, and others. Military generals like Daniel Morgan and John Cadwalader. The designer of the first 6 frigates of the United States, Joshua Humphreys. We also have concluded a 2-part series on the astonishing achievements of the 3rd President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. In this video, we will examine the short but extraordinary life of explorer and surveyor Meriwether Lewis. Lewis followed other notable pioneers of Welsh descent in North America. Cymru is surrounded by sea on 3 sides, and no part of Wales is more than 50 miles from the sea. This geography spawned a number of Welsh explorers and pirates in North America. In 1631 and 32, Captain Thomas James set out to discover the Northwest Passage, the hoped-for ocean route around the top of North America to Asia. In April of 1795, John Thomas Evans set off on an expedition with Spanish backing to explore the Missouri and try to discover a route to the Pacific Ocean from its headwaters. He produced an early map of the Missouri River. David Thompson, a Canadian and son of Welsh immigrants, traveled 56,000 miles across North America, mapping 1.9 million square miles of the continent along the way. Welsh pirate Henry Morgan traveled the ocean in North America and died on the 25th of August, 1688, in the British colony of Jamaica. John Evans was a Welsh pirate who had a short but successful career in the Caribbean. He died in 1723. The list could go on and on of explorers of Welsh heritage. Meriwether Lewis was born on August 18, 1774, on Locust Hill Plantation, Albemarle County, colony of Virginia, in the present-day community of Ivy. He was the son of William Lewis and Lucy Meriwether. It was Meriwether's great-great-grandfather, Major John Lewis, who emigrated to North America from Wales in 1653. John was the elder of 2 sons who came to Virginia on a ship with their father, known in family history as John the Emigrant. Major John was born in 1633 in a small village near Aber-ga-venny in Monmouthshire, Wales. After his father died of pneumonia in November of 1779, Meriwether moved with his mother and stepfather, Captain John Marks, to Georgia. They settled along the Broad River in the Goose Pond community within the Broad River Valley in Wilkes County. Lewis had no formal education until he was 13 years of age, but during his time in Georgia, he enhanced his skills as a hunter and an outdoorsman. He would often go venture out in the middle of the night in the dead of winter with only his dog to go hunting. Even at an early age, he was interested in natural history, which would develop into a lifelong passion. His mother taught him how to gather wild herbs for medicinal purposes. In the Broad River Valley, Lewis first dealt with Native Americans. This was the traditional territory of the Cherokee, who resented constant encroachment by the colonist. Lewis seems to have been a champion for the Cherokee among his own people. While in Georgia, he met Eric Parker, who encouraged him to travel. At age 13, Lewis was sent back to Virginia for education by private tutors. His father's older brother, Nicholas Lewis, became his guardian. He joined the Virginia militia and in 1794 he was sent as part of a detachment that was involved in putting down the Whiskey Rebellion. This was the result of a so-called whiskey tax. It was the first tax imposed on a domestic product by the newly formed federal government. This violent tax protest began in 1791 and ended in 1794 during the presidency of George Washington. In 1795, Lewis joined the United States Army, commissioned as an ensign. This is equivalent to a modern-day rank of second lieutenant. By 1800, he rose to the rank of captain and ended his Army service in 1801. Among his commanding officers was William Clark, who would later become his companion in the Corps of Discovery. On April 1, 1801, Lewis was appointed as Secretary to the President by President Thomas Jefferson, whom he knew through Virginia society in Albemarle County. Lewis resided in the presidential mansion and frequently conversed with various prominent figures in politics, the arts, and other topics. He compiled information on the personnel and politics of the United States Army, which had seen an influx of Federalist officers as the result of midnight appointments made by outgoing President John Adams in 1801. Meriwether was elected a member of the American Philosophical Society in 1802. When Jefferson began to plan for an expedition across the continent, he chose Lewis to lead the expedition. Meriwether Lewis then recruited his old friend William Clark, then aged 33, to share command of the expedition. So why did President Thomas Jefferson want this expedition to occur? After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, Jefferson wanted to get an accurate sense of the new land and its resources. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States. The president also hoped to find a, quote, direct and practicable water communication across this continent for the purpose of finding commerce with Asia, end of quote. Notice they're still hoping to find a northwest passage across the continent. In addition, Jefferson placed special importance on declaring U.S. sovereignty over the Native Americans along the Missouri River. There's an old saying that possession is 9/10 of the law. Jefferson wanted the United States to explore, survey, and possess this new territory before other native or European powers claimed it as their own. This expedition, aptly named Corps of Discovery, was a specially established unit of the United States Army, which formed the nucleus of the Lewis and Clark expedition that took place between May of 1804 and September of 1806. The Corps were led jointly by Captain Lewis and Second Lieutenant William Clark. The Corps' objectives were scientific and commercial, to study the area's plants, animal life, and geography, and to learn how the Louisiana Purchase could be exploited economically. Aside from its military composition, the Corps' additional personnel included scouts, boatsmen, and civilians. Including civilians, the entire party consisted of about only 40 individuals. On its 2-year expedition through the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, the Corps encountered more than 24 Native American tribes. This exploration by Lewis and Clark was the first transcontinental expedition to the Pacific coast by the United States. They reached the Pacific 12 years after Sir Alexander Mackenzie did overland in Canada. When they left Fort Mandan in April of 1805, they were accompanied by the 16-year-old Shoshone woman Sacagawea, the wife of the French-Canadian fur trader Toussaint Charbonneau. The Corps of Discovery found the Native American tribes accustomed to dealing with European traders and already connected with global markets. But there's something else they were trying to discover. In a letter from Thomas Jefferson to Meriwether Lewis on January 22, 1804, Jefferson stated this, quote, "I enclosed you the map of a Mr. Evans, a Welshman, employed by the Spanish government for that purpose, but whose original object, I believe, had been to go in search of the Welsh Indians, said to be up the Missouri. On this subject, a Mr. Rees of the same nation, established in the western parts of Pennsylvania, will write to you." End of quote. According to popular legend, the Welsh Indians were descendants of Prince Madoc of Wales, who allegedly discovered and colonized America many centuries earlier before Columbus. Enthusiasm for the myth of Madoc's North American descendants reached its peak in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and it was popularly believed that Welsh-speaking Indians resided along the upper reaches of the Missouri River. The legend inspired mapmaker John Thomas Evans to leave Wales to seek out his supposed long-lost kinsman in the 1790s. Among other Welshmen taken with the story was Morgan John Rees, referred to in Jefferson's letter, a radical Baptist minister who raised money in Wales to spread the gospel among the Welsh Indians before emigrating to America himself in the late 1790s, where he became acquainted with Evans and his mission. Rees traveled widely in the United States before abandoning his ministry and settling in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, where he died in December of 1804. The Corps of Discovery were not able to confirm the existence of these Welsh Indians. Regrettably, the Mandan were decimated by a widespread smallpox epidemic in 1781. In 1836, there were no more than 1,600 full-blood Mandans left, but following another smallpox epidemic in 1836 and 1837, this number was estimated to have dropped to only 125 full-blooded Mandan by 1838. In the 2010 census, 1,171 people reported Mandan ancestry, but only 365 of them identified as full-blooded Mandans. Perhaps modern DNA analysis can finally answer this question. Now back to the Corps of Discovery. After crossing the Rocky Mountains, the expedition reached the Oregon Country and the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. This was disputed land beyond the original Louisiana Purchase. They slowly returned home beginning in March of 1806, bringing with them an immense amount of information about the region, as well as numerous plant and animal specimens. They demonstrated the possibility of overland travel to the Pacific coast. The success of their journey helped to strengthen the American concept of manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was destined to reach all the way across North America from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. As an interesting side note, Sergeant Charles Floyd from Kentucky would be the only member of the Corps of Discovery who died on the journey. Floyd died on August 20th, 1804, near present-day Sioux City, Iowa, from what is now believed to have been a ruptured appendix. Floyd kept a journal until a few days before his death. Lewis regarded him as, quote, a young man of much merit, end of quote. A large monument is located at his burial site. Like Meriwether Lewis, Floyd was also an American of Welsh descent. After returning from the expedition, Lewis received a reward of 1,600 acres of land. He also initially made arrangements to publish the Corps of Discovery journals, but had difficulty completing his writing. In 1807, Jefferson appointed him governor of the Louisiana Territory, and he settled in St. Louis. Unfortunately, Lewis's record as an administrator is mixed. On one hand, he published the first laws in the Upper Louisiana Territory, established roads, and furthered Jefferson's mission as a strong proponent of the fur trade. He negotiated peace among several quarreling Indian tribes. His duty to enforce Indian treaties was to protect the western Indian lands from encroachment, which was opposed by the rush of settlers looking to open new lands for settlements. But on the other hand, due to his quarreling with local political leaders, controversy over his approvals of trading licenses, land grant politics, and the plundering of some Native American peoples, a few historians have argued that Lewis was a poor administrator. Lewis's primary quarrels were with his territorial secretary, Frederick Bates. Bates was accused of undermining Lewis to seek Lewis's dismissal and his own appointment as governor. Because of the slow-moving mail system, by now former President Jefferson and Lewis's superiors in Washington got the impression that Lewis did not adequately keep in touch with them. Because of Bates' accusation, the War Department refused to reimburse Lewis for a large sum he had personally advanced for his duties as governor of the Louisiana Territory. When Lewis's creditors heard that Lewis would not be reimbursed for the expenses, they called in Lewis's notes, forcing him to liquidate his assets, including the land he was granted for the Lewis and Clark expedition. One of the primary reasons Lewis set out for Washington on this final trip was to clear up questions raised by Bates and to seek a reimbursement of the money he had personally advanced for the territorial government. Sadly, the U.S. government finally reimbursed the expenses to Lewis's estate 2 years after his death. Bates eventually became the governor of Missouri. Though some historians have speculated that Lewis abused alcohol or opiates based upon an account attributed to Gilbert C. Russell at Fort Pickering on Lewis's final journey, others have argued that his adversary, Frederick Bates, never alleged that Lewis suffered from such addictions and that Bates most certainly would have used them against Lewis if Lewis had suffered from those conditions. On September 3, 1809, Lewis set out for Washington, D.C. He hoped to resolve issues regarding the denied payments and expenses while serving as governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, leaving him in ruinous debt. Lewis carried his journals with him for delivery to his publisher. He intended to travel to Washington by ship from New Orleans, but changed his mind while floating down the Mississippi River from St. Louis. He disembarked and decided instead to make an overland journey via the Natchez Trace and then east to Washington. The Natchez Trace was the old pioneer road between Natchez, Mississippi and Nashville, Tennessee. It was not unusual for robbers to prey upon travelers on that road and sometimes even kill their victims. Lewis had written his will before his journey, and he also attempted suicide on this journey but was restrained by others in his party. According to a lost letter from October 19, 1809 to Thomas Jefferson, Lewis stopped at an inn on the Natchez Trace, originally called Griner's Stand and later called Grinder's Stand, about 70 miles southwest of Nashville on October 10th. After dinner, he retired to his one-room cabin. In the pre-dawn hours of October 11th, the innkeeper's wife, Priscilla Griner, heard gunshots. Servants found Lewis badly injured from multiple gunshot wounds, one each to his head and gut. He bled out on his buffalo hide robe and died shortly after sunrise. The Nashville Democratic Clarion published this account, which newspapers across the country repeated and embellished. The Nashville newspaper also reported that Lewis's throat was cut. Money that Lewis had borrowed from Major Russell at Fort Pickering to complete the journey was also missing. So was it suicide, or was Lewis robbed and murdered? While Lewis's friend Thomas Jefferson and some modern historians have generally accepted Lewis's death as a suicide, debate continues well over 200 years later. First of all, no one reported seeing Lewis shoot himself. 3 inconsistent, somewhat contemporary accounts are attributed to Mrs. Griner, who left no written account or testimony. Some thus believe her testimony was fabricated, while others point to it as proof of suicide. Mrs. Griner claimed Lewis acted strangely the night before his death, standing and pacing during dinner, and talking to himself in the way that one would speak to a lawyer, with his face flushed, as if it had come upon him in a fit. Today, we would call this having a mental or schizophrenic episode. She continued to hear him talking to himself after he retired to his room. And then at some point in the night, she heard multiple gunshots, a scuffle, and someone calling for help. She claimed to see Lewis through the slit in the door, crawling back to his room. She did not explain why she stopped investigating right then and there, or why she decided the next morning to send her children to look for his servants. Another account claims the servants found him in the cabin, wounded and bloody, with part of his skull gone, where he lived for several more hours. In her last account, 3 men followed him up the Natchez Trace, where he pulled his pistols and challenged them to a duel. She heard voices and gunfire in his cabin about 1 a.m. She then found it empty with a large amount of gunpowder on the floor. At the time of his death, Meriwether Lewis was only 35 years old. Lewis's relatives maintained it was a murder. A coroner's inquest held immediately after his death, as provided by local law, did not charge anyone with a crime. The jury foreman kept a pocket diary of the proceedings, which awkwardly disappeared in the early 1900s. When William Clark and Thomas Jefferson were informed of Lewis's death, both accepted the conclusion of it as a suicide. Based on their positions and the lost Lewis letter of mid-September 1809, historian Stephen Ambrose dismissed the murder theory as, quote, not convincing. The only doctor to examine Lewis's body did not do so until 40 years later in 1848. The Tennessee State Commission, including Dr. Samuel B. Moore, were charged with locating Lewis's grave and erecting a monument over it. They opened Lewis's grave. The commission wrote in its official report that though the impression had long prevailed that Lewis died by his own hand, quote, it seems to be more probable that he died by the hands of an assassin, end of quote. As late as 2010, a large number of Lewis's kin, descendants through his sister Jane, sought to have the body exhumed for forensic analysis to try to determine whether his death was a suicide or murder. In 2008, the United States Department of the Interior approved the exhumation, but rescinded that decision in 2010, stating that the decision is final. It's easy to understand why Lewis would have been deeply depressed. He had huge debts, harsh critics. He was reputed to be a heavy drinker, and he had repeatedly failed to prepare the expedition's journals for final publication. Lewis was also frustrated in his attempt to find a wife. Lewis was buried near present-day Hohenwald, Tennessee, near his place of death. His grave was located about 200 yards from Grinder's Stand alongside the Natchez Trace. At first, the grave was unmarked. Alexander Wilson, an ornithologist and friend of Lewis who visited the grave in May of 1810 during a trip to New Orleans to sell his drawings, wrote that he gave the innkeeper Robert Griner money to erect a fence around the grave to protect it from animals. The state of Tennessee erected a monument over Lewis's grave in 1848. A stonemason from Columbia, Tennessee, chose the design of a broken column, commonly used at the time to symbolize a life cut short. An iron fence erected around the base of the monument was partially dismantled during the Civil War by Confederate detachments under General John Bell Hood marching from Shiloh to Franklin. They forged the iron into horseshoes. A September 1905 article in a local magazine called attention to Lewis's abandoned and overgrown grave. A county road worker took the initiative to open a road to the cemetery. Thereafter, a local Tennessee Meriwether Lewis Monument Committee was soon formed to push for restoring Lewis's gravesite. In 1925, in response to the committee's work, President Calvin Coolidge designated Lewis's grave as the 5th national monument in the South. For many years, Lewis's legacy was overlooked, inaccurately measured, and somewhat tarnished by his alleged suicide. Yet his contributions to science, the exploration of the western U.S., and his place among some of the greatest of the world's explorers are considered immense today. Lewis is honored by many American cities and geographic locations bearing his name. Educational institutions and military vessels are named after him, along with coins, postage stamps, and species of plants. The Meriwether Lewis National Monument is located at milepost 385.9 on the Natchez Trace Parkway. In conclusion, Thomas Jefferson, who lived approximately 10 miles away in Monticello from Locust Hill where Meriwether Lewis was born, is credited by some with the inscription on the north side of Lewis's tombstone written in Latin, which translated reads like this: I died before my time, but thou, O great and good Republic, live out my years, while you live out your own. Meriwether Lewis, a great American explorer, soldier, politician, and public administrator of Welsh descent. As an explorer, his studies, research, and writing paved the way for the American nation to boldly move westward. May his legacy last for many generations to come. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel or give us a like, and please feel free to make any comments below. If you would like to see more biographies of leading Welsh Americans, give us a like. And if you have an individual you would like us to showcase, let me know in the comments below. This is Greg Thomas saying Hoylem Nower, bye for now.